Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and today we've got two guests joining us instead of the regular one. We have Danan Flander, the general manager of the Golden Guardians, as well as Jonathon McDaniel, his assistant GM. Guys,
Hello.
welcome to the show. Glad to have you both here. Happy Thanksgiving to Danan, who is American.
Good to be here. Yeah.
Happy Thursday to John, who is a
Thank you
fellow
very
Canadian.
much.
So we don't have you on here to talk about holidays, of course. We have you on here because Golden Guardians have gone through a really big kind of rework and kind of rewrite of the team this offseason. And I'd love to kind of talk through that, talk about the decision-making that led to this overhaul, what your original plans might have been, why that might have changed, and how you feel about the players and the coaches that you're working with now. So, I think the best place to start here is just to lead us through your offseason, because from the outside and from some reports that happened, it seems like it was a bit of a bumpy ride. So, Danan, if you wouldn't mind kind of like walking us through how the season ended, what you thought was going to happen, and how that might have changed.
Yeah, for sure. So for us, I think the season ended pretty fantastically, I think, compared to where a lot of people thought we were going to be. I think internally this wasn't the biggest shock. It was pleasant for sure. I think being able to prove everybody wrong is always a boost. But when it comes to the standards we were setting and the players that we had, we already came into the year with a lot of optimism, saying that this is something we thought we could do. And I think we anticipated that we were going to make playoffs. I think that was always like a standard set that we'd accepted. I think the question for us was like, yeah, we can probably win a playoff series this year. If we get placed against like FlyQuest for the 7th time in a row or something like we did, maybe we'll win that set. We didn't. But funny enough, come summer, we end up getting our window against TSM. We almost end up taking 2 series instead of just 1. Outside of that, obviously having to face Liquid, who obviously at the time was another really strong team for the region. For us, for all intents and purposes, that's a victory for how we wanted to like build a foundation and get the players in the door that would help us attract some other like top tier talent. So then as we entered the offseason with that optimism, we said, okay, cool. A lot of what we've done is correct. So that's like validating. We can build on that. Let's keep using that same decision-making process and let's work our way towards looking at a championship, because obviously that wasn't the goal this year. As we worked into that, it became more and more clear that we had built the foundation to attract top players. I think that was one of the biggest challenges I faced coming into Golden Guardians initially, was going from kind of like 0 to, you want to get to 100 as quickly as you can, as functionally as you can, without it being super brittle. And I think that was like our biggest challenge for the first 2 years, was like, okay, how do we attract the Licorices of the world? How do we attract these players that are in high regard, and it takes a lot to pull them away from teams like C9 and TSM and TL and even like CLG at the 2 years ago. So I think we've done that. We built that platform, and so we entered the offseason saying, cool, with this foundation, we've got the magnets we need to pull players. Now it's just going to be about spend, right? It's going to be about like actually taking the shot. And we definitely went into the offseason with the anticipation that that's what we were going to do. I think we leveraged our position pretty well for my first 24 months with Golden Guardians, coming in, spending modestly, and ultimately being super fiscally responsible in a way that was like gonna set us up to be able to take not just like a single swing. I think, for example, some teams set themselves up for the short-term success, like FlyQuest this year, where they got their Worlds run, which is great. But there was a lot of instability on what that could be moving forward. For us, we didn't really have that question. Assuming we could spend, we had players that we knew we were going to have for a while, and then it was just about bringing on that top talent to complement them. So we went to do that. We were in the conversation for a whole bunch of these players. Like, if there's a player that you think for us was functionally an upgrade going into the offseason, we absolutely had that conversation at every single layer. And as we ended up actually starting to talk through it, everything still felt great. Everything was fine. We were proceeding through talking to buyouts and talking to when the free agent players were either getting permission or already had permission. All those conversations were going really well. We were, I think, for all intents and purposes, poised to do exactly what we said we were going to do, which is take that foundation, attract those top players. Unfortunately, probably, and I think Hunter spoke on this a little bit publicly already, but probably at like the absolute unequivocal most unfortunate moment that timing wise, just like there was like the slightest of desync at a really inopportune moment, and that ended up basically putting a dagger in our pursuit of Licorice, right? I think
Yeah.
we,
So,
for all
so
intents
to
and
be more
purposes, we're in
specific there,
position.
like,
Yeah.
so from the outside, what it seems like is that kind of word came down from head office, basically, like, hey, you can't spend. Like, did they come in and say, like, here's a cap on your budget and you can spend this much and that's it? Or how did that work out?
No. So it's never as like simple or straightforward as that. Like obviously things are always going to be a little bit more complicated. Like there's a lot of thought into all of the decision making. It's never just like kind of randomly, okay, it's this.
Yeah.
I think the timing of this was just super suspect because obviously the NBA is going through its decision making process at the time for what next year's going to be, and none of that was ironed out. At the same time that the parent organization was also having a whole bunch of their own conversations. We obviously are in a position where we just opened a venue last year. There's like 1,000 little things happening all at once that ultimately just led to okay, this like one clear thing that we were going to try to do, the timing just isn't right anymore. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, which, it happens. That's going to be sports. That's not surprising. I think obviously what people really want to hear about is kind of the rebound, like how we took that decision making. I don't think there's any outcome this offseason that would have just said, okay, cool, like we just do it anyways. I think that's just irresponsible of any team to consider doing. So realistically for us, what became the focus point was like, what are we doing instead? What's like the next setup for the plan? And we can break that down if you want to.
Yeah, we'd love to dive into that, and I think we'll probably spend the bulk of our time together speaking about that. But maybe before we move on entirely, there were reports out there, and I think you mentioned a minute ago that you guys were looking at putting in a bid on Licorice from Cloud9. I think a lot of people can see why you would want to do that, and why you had a free agency opening a top lane. There was an actual position to be filled, kind of thing. You're not like replacing a player you already had under contract. The other position where that was the case was support, where Huhu is becoming a free agent. Is that somewhere where you guys had been looking at, like you really wanted to re-sign Huhu, bring him back in? Were there other supports you were looking at? Like, how far was your plan at trying to load up for a championship really going to go?
So I think we had a lot of optimism that bringing Jay back was going to make the most sense. So we actually weren't super stressed or pushed on that front. We weren't in a position where we felt like we needed to import, or if we felt like we needed to make a significant pivot. I think also the pivot options in North America aren't great. I think showing with what we did with Jay, also kind of examples why sticking with him would be cool. I think we obviously brought on a player who was ready for a role swap and brought him from relative obscurity, I would assume, in the bottom 2 or 3 of the LCS initially, because he's obviously finding his footing and like learning how to lane with a new partner in the first place, all the way up to being regarded as potentially a top 3, top 4 support. And I think that's where we valued him throughout the entire offseason. So as we were working our way towards free agency, I think a lot of bringing him back wasn't like hinged on him versus another player. It was obviously about the overall plan. It was making sure we were aligned and able to strike. And we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where we were effectively overpromising or over leveraging ourselves. So while we probably could have like signed an early Huhi extension in the offseason, I think that would have been a disservice to our decision making process and ultimately his options, where if he's in a position where free agency is valuable to him, absolutely, I think that makes sense. And that's the conversation we were having a lot of the times, where it was like, yeah, we could probably sign an extension right now, but functionally, we probably shouldn't do that until we actually know what the entire plan is. And a lot of our plan for this year, of course, was leveraged on those extensions that we were talking through with Closer, FBI, and the guys we were bringing on. So it was kind of like a step-by-step, like, let's do this first, this first, this first. Bring back who he was obviously part of the plan. It just wasn't like the first step for our offseason.
Sure. So you guys were put into this position where you're not going to be able to, go out and kind of load up the way you're intending. All these other pieces of context come in. And so you make the choice to pivot into a rebuild. John, do you think you could give us a little bit of an idea, like why you would go full on, like, hey, we're going to wipe the entire thing out, like sell off these players and start, rather than retaining maybe not all 3 of the players you still had in contract, but a couple of them at least? Like, why reset fully rather than doing only like a partial reset?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to this. Obviously, the first one to get to is like the player happiness, right? Like if you have a bunch of guys that know they're top in their role, like they want to win, they want to push for those trophies, they want to push for high placements in domestic and worlds. They kind of want to have a group of people around them that can kind of facilitate that, and that they can build that kind of initial goal. Unfortunately, if you're going to be in a position where you're struggling from a budgetary perspective, you're not going to have access to all the top players who are potentially on the market for buyouts or want large contracts. Like, you're not always going to have the money to make all of that work. So ultimately, like, for us, like, we're very transparent with the players and saying, hey, like, this is the spot we're in. Here's what we're going to try and do, but like, we can't guarantee that this is going to work. And ultimately, in a lot of those scenarios, the players are going to say, like, I want to at least talk to other teams. I want to see what my other options are. And ultimately, that's kind of the path that led us down to the decision we made, as well as obviously the perspective of, you can always field a roster of veterans that have been around for long enough to kind of be able to find their footing pretty quickly on a new team, and just aim for something. I don't want to say mediocrity per se, but something kind of just middling performance, just to kind of stay afloat. And obviously, that's not really a good long-term goal. If our initial perspective was we want to spend big now because we kind of had to build up to it. Well, if we can't spend big now, we need to start building up again for the next time that we can, and that typically means taking some bets on some younger or newer players that we can kind of build up to get to that position that we felt that we would be in for this offseason.
As we go into a rebuild year in general, what does that look like in the LCS? Given that fans might be familiar with what a rebuild looks like for a traditional sports franchise, say in the NBA or whatever else, but how might that be different? How might it be similar when you're doing a rebuild or a reset in the LCS?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for all intents and purposes, it's relatively similar. I think obviously if you look at other five team member games, it's going to be some like amalgamation of players. It's never like literally 5 rookies. I think the thing that's interesting from our perspective is that a lot of it, at least in my opinion, is leveraged on your coaches. The actual like specific player breakdown matters less and less as you have like a higher caliber set of coaches. And I think we're really geared up. We're expanding our coaching staff, which I think that'll go out soon, adding some guys. And we were already so happy with the foundation we'd set this year with kind of what is effectively our LCS Australian core, where we have Nick, who obviously spent time in OS, but then we also brought on Spooks and Choo-Choos, which we call them Sam and Aaron. Those are our LCS assistant coaches effectively. And I think the better coaches we have, the more confidence we have in bringing on more rookies at once. I think we were already, to be super clear, I think we were already rebuilding this year. I think we obviously had moved on from contracts. We'd moved on from a lot of these veterans. Froggen, obviously Ole. Like, for all intents and purposes, this was a surprisingly young year. If you look back and you take away the glamour, the excitement that was like Closer and FBI popping off the way they did. I think Closer and FBI were both pretty young. We were bringing on like Golden Glue and Demonte, who, in the grand scheme of things, are still relatively young, hadn't had a lot of experience, at least not formalized in the same way that like players like obviously Doublelift and Bjergsen and Sneaky have. And then simultaneously bringing on Huhi in a role swap. Like that to me already is kind of a pseudo rebuild year. I think we just didn't know exactly. We had new coaches coming on. We didn't know how much we could reset. And obviously we ended up doing pretty well. And we end up looking more like a competitive, like almost veteran level team, even though in my opinion, we were still young. I think the pivot that we've made now is that we're aggressing on that even more so and saying, look, we can bring on 3 almost literal rookies who have 0 competitive LCS games. Or just like pro level games in general, and then the only experience we have is our bot lane, where we have like Latin American all-star consistently in MVP, as well as Stixxay, who I'm sure we'll talk about Trevor here in a bit, but is kind of the cornerstone, being able to build like that foundation.
Sure. Yeah, and before we get into talking specifically through like the players you picked up and how you selected them and all things, I think it'd be really helpful for the listeners who maybe they aren't so familiar with the concept of a rebuild or how this plays out. But just to get a better idea of like, and I think John, you were mentioning this a bit before, how does a rebuild allow you to set up for, if you say this is not a year where we think we can win a championship, but how does a rebuild like this, bringing in these rookies and so on, set you up in the future to do that? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so obviously for the most obvious one is taking a look at the FBI closer stuff. Obviously we brought in players that were not really on a lot of people's radars, and ultimately like we had good performances pretty quick out the gate, which kind of speeds up the process a little bit. Obviously if you're doing it with younger players who maybe don't have experience because they're not playing in domestic leagues across the world, they're potentially playing in collegiate, as we have with 2 of our guys, or potentially amateur and below in other cases. Obviously those players you kind of need to put a little more work in it at the beginning before you get those kind of explosive results on the other end. So if we make the right bets and everything pays off, then we can end up in a similar spot where we have those kind of payoff moments where the young player that was maybe written off a year ago is potentially going to be kind of amongst the top of the competition in their role within the league. And at that point, that's when you start to be able to attract those top players from other teams.
So, I guess correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the trajectory you might be looking at is you play out the 2021 season. You have players who do kind of the FBI, who he closer thing, who came in without maybe being considered these really big pickups, but by the end of the year, they're, landing on all pro teams or, whether that's the first team or the third team, wherever it is, now they're really respected. And at that point, then you can either hold on to those players and sign more around them, whether you're loading up with a really proven player like a Licorice from somewhere else, or in some cases, you could also sell those players and make a return on them, right? When you're setting up for this and you bring in all these players, do you look at both of those options with equal kind of value, or I assume you're kind of hoping that you can hold on to them and build around them, but how much does the opportunity or the option to sell a player at the end of the year weigh into it?
So when it comes to weighing like retaining or selling a player, like weighing those options, they're definitely never equal. I think in most circumstances, there's like a pretty heavy preference on retaining the player. You've been invested in them already. Obviously, you already have a relationship with your staff. Like there's a lot of things, net positives overall, that even when players don't work out entirely, there's just the inherent, you can even fall to some cost fallacy if you really want to point at things that could drive you that direction. But I think for how to navigate that specifically, it evolves constantly. I think through the offseason, it's always going to be adjusted based on what other teams are doing. I think that there's like a lot of super clear off ramps for a player in a year where you're not going to do what they want to do. Which like we're super collaborative, so we hear and understand what our players want to do. We know their goals before they get here. We know their goals effectively on entry. We are aligning their goals while they're here. And then even on the way out the door, like those are still conversations we're having. Like, hey, the decision we've both agreed to, is that getting you closer to where you want to be? Assuming it is, cool, yeah, we should execute on this. I think for all intents and purposes, yeah, you want to be in a position where you can retain and build and keep doing things. But simultaneously, you have to be able to recognize your capacity, what you're going to be able to do, weigh that against their goals, and see if there's something like a relationship that stays manageable. And I think in our circumstance, with the teams that we're trying to like swing and hit home runs right now, and the players that we've built and the goals that they have on the timelines that they have them, that's where, like, as we continue to evolve and understand the process, it just became more and more clear that it was going to make sense to make a trade.
Sure. And I guess, as a final angle on this overall, the concept of rebuild and all that, how long would you guys look at this and expect, again, like looking back at the NBA example, maybe you'd say, hey, this is going to be a 3-year period of rebuilding. We're going to get a bunch of high draft picks and it's going to take a few years, but by 3 years from now, we're going to be back, trying to win. I'm pretty sure in the LCS context, you're not looking at a 3-year rebuild, but what kind of time horizon, like, do you think that 1 year can be enough to turn this around, and that, 2021 being the rebuild year, 2022, you can be back for competing for a championship? Like, what kind of timeline would you guys put on that? Maybe, John, you can jump in on this one.
Yeah, so it ultimately really depends on how things go. Like, obviously, you'll see in the public-facing contract database that a lot of our LCS guys, I think almost all of them, if not all of them, are on 2023 agreements. So that for us is a 3-year commitment for us,
which is the maximum, I believe.
Correct, that's the maximum. So obviously for us, it's the time horizon is always going to be a little more condensed compared to other traditional sports leagues where you can go beyond that 3-year limit. But for us, that is kind of like the maximum amount of time that we can kind of assuredly have with this group of players. And as far as moving forward in the time horizon that we're expecting, it really does depend on what happens, right? Like if we kind of hit the ground running and we have a crazy spontaneous performance that defies all expectations again, then obviously that accelerates things, and we could potentially be having the conversations we were having this November come next November and be kind of looking to do that rebuild pretty quickly. Obviously, that's not our expectation. It's a kind of a cool if it happens kind of scenario. The more realistic one is that we spend a lot of 2021 kind of building up this group of players, building up our coaching staff more, and kind of getting everyone on the same page, so that come 2022, that's when we're starting to look to make kind of a more powerful impression and mark on the league, so that come the offseason from after that 2022 season, we can then kind of have this kind of window open up again.
Yeah, so maybe it's a 1-year rebuild, maybe it's a 2-year. You kind of see how it plays out. Great. So I think this is the part that everybody's going to be a lot more excited about is jumping into the actual teams you guys have put together at LCS and also at the academy level. So I'd love to talk through kind of each of these players to whatever level of depth is appropriate. And I'm not sure which of you guys had a deeper hand in kind of identifying and picking them up, or who else on your staff you want to credit with that. But we can just maybe run through the LCS roster. So we can maybe talk about the Niles and Iconic duo because they're both coming out of Maryville, playing in collegiate together. So tell me about these two guys. Tell me about we saw both of them at scouting grounds. Definitely heard Niles' name quite a bit over the past year. If you have been paying attention to the kind of the amateur and collegiate scene, what is so exciting about this top jungle pairing that you're bringing in for LCS?
So what's super cool about this is I think a lot of people get hung up weirdly enough on either scouting grounds results or they try to point to the fact that these guys are coming directly from collegiate, spending no time in academy. I think there's not consideration for the thoughtfulness on our end with respect to we've been paying attention to them for a while. I think if there's a team that has ears on the ground, and John can attest this because this is what he does all day, it's going to be us. These are not names that just like we pulled out of a hat because they happen to qualify for scouting grounds in the last month. These are guys that I can remember having conversations about 6 months ago. These are guys that in the middle of our year were being heavily considered for implementing on Academy because of the performances they were putting up and the presence they were showing in solo queue. They just check a lot of boxes for us for what we'd want to do. And I think even in circumstances where we aren't like outright fully rebuilding, they still had a lot of high priority. I think it's just like a cool aside that they happen to play together, but there's not like a huge indicator where it's like, Aiden, which is Niles, and then Ethan, which is Iconic. There's not a huge line drawn where it's like, because they play together, we have to keep them together, and that's like our focus here as much as it is. Those are the two individual players we thought made the most sense for what we're trying to do, and they just happen to both come from Maryville, which is cool. Good on Corky.
For sure. John, are you a little more hands-on involved with kind of scouting the players and picking kind of the rookies you might want to go after, or is it more balanced?
Yeah, so I think for the LCS side of things, it's typically very collaborative between myself, Danan, and the coaching staff, specifically Nick. A lot of us we kind of have a bunch of group chats all over the place on Discord, and we are always talking, especially once we hit off season, like what are our plans? Who do we have our eyes on? What are we going to do to kind of not just have like a general, like this is the person we're paying attention to, but what tangible things are we going to do to get a kind of clear idea? Like obviously, I think there was a patch recently that broke this functionality, but you used to be able to very easily watch through op.gg like a live game. You would pull up someone's name, it downloads a file, it kind of pops you right into a spectate their game.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Off of live, like currently being played games, and that was a lot of what we did. Is we would hop into their games all the time. We'd hop in, watch, see what there is to see, as well as we also ran some trials throughout kind of this off season specifically before scouting grounds actually, which kind of gave us a very clear idea of who should be on our radar before scouting grounds even started. Which, funny enough, is kind of why we kind of have the opinion that people should really not read too much into the scouting grounds results. Our trials, we were mixing teams up very consistently. We were having them compete against our academy roster from 2020 and kind of have that as our litmus test, because we know what our 2020 academy roster could do. So by having them play against some of their counterparts in these tryouts across amateur, collegiate, and a few other scenes, we're able to kind of get a good read on the relative level compared to something that we're expecting. I know a lot of people at home, when they watch scouting grounds or collegiate, they tend to see a lot of competition that's not super high level, and so they just assume that you popped off in a game in scouting grounds, but these are kind of pickup teams with a lot of young players. Like, it doesn't really mean too much. But for us, like, we kind of had a somewhat more controlled and stable environment to get this read. So to go back to your question, like, this is something that like I obviously am definitely a part of, but it's also kind of a lot of the coaching staff stepping up and being very much a part of this process as well.
Yeah. So what was it about, were Niles and Iconic a couple of guys that jumped out to you from those trials, or is it more from their collegiate play? Like, what is it about these guys that really convinced you they were the ones to go after?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, Niles, I think, was on their radar very consistently. Very standout performer in collegiate, and it's been very clear for a long time that, once the next top laner falls out, the next person to slide back into the academy level competition at least should be Niles. For us, having done the trials that we did, we got to work with them a little bit on kind of like a one-on-one basis with our coaching staff, as well as seeing them in these kind of higher level scrim kind of trial games. And through that, we were like increasingly confident the more that we saw of these guys that these are LCS capable players, and all they need is to continue working with our staff, and we can easily get them there.
And Niles has the profile of a pretty standard like carry kind of top laner, right? Is that more what you saw from him, or is he? Do you see him more as a balanced kind of a player?
Yeah, so for Niles specifically, one thing that we saw that stood out very clearly was just high level communications skills.
Okay.
Obviously, a lot of top laners, even the carry types, they're all keen to get the early pressure in their lane and then just try and run away with the game. But
Yeah.
The way that Niles played the game, he was very keen to just communicate whatever the case may be. So if he's playing a tank, or like there's opportunities on the other side of the map, he's more than happy to communicate his exact state of game and kind of get everyone on board to make sure that we're able to get a lead somewhere, whether that's through him or somewhere else. Like, it was something that he was always able to do, like, both sides of. And that's something that we saw like a lot of potential in growing and nurturing.
Sure. And what about for Iconic? What kind of a play style, or what kind of like profile of a player should we expect from him?
Yeah, somewhat similar. I think a lot of the strength of why Maryville succeeded as much as they did is just a lot of good collaboration and communication skills across probably the entire roster, if I were to be honest. And I think Iconic does that really well. Him and Niles specifically work really well together, and their experience is going to help that kind of accelerate a little bit. But for Iconic, especially with the staff that we have, we're very confident that we can take the foundation that he's already gotten from the team play side and really enable a lot of the players that we feel can be future superstars in Ablazeolive and Niles.
Great. Okay. Well, why don't we switch a little bit, go to the other side of the map? I think Newbie is the other player that people are going to have a lot less familiarity with. And Danan, maybe you can walk us through, you mentioned a little bit of kind of where he's coming from and what caught your attention about him, and maybe give us a little more detail on who is this player and how do you feel about him?
Yeah, for sure. So Newbie is an interesting case. I think you can liken him pretty parallel in line with Closer, like our traction, our interest, and kind of the pathway for it. I think, again, like I've said, if there's an org that has their ear to the ground, that understands kind of the pulse of what's going on outside of NA, especially in the minor regions, it's going to be us. Through Nick, through John, through obviously our coaching staff. Prior to his departure, he's now head coach for Dignitas, but James Harrison, he had a lot of history in Brazil, in CBLOL. So I think like the pathways for us are a lot more open-ended because we have this list of players that when it comes time and we think there's a slot for it, we can angle for it. I think like historically, importing support has been a struggle, right? Unless you literally have Core, JJ, and Ignore. Importing has been kind of nightmarish for support in North America. We had the luxury of having an entirely domestic topside with 2 Americans and a Canadian now, as well as the vast majority of our 80 carry listings. Like as we were breaking down everything, waiting for, there was, in case people didn't follow free agency, there was a huge 80 carry shift where like 6 80 carries all changed teams all at once. Because of that, I think we looked at it and said, okay, in almost all circumstances, we're going to be domestic. At that point, we have tons of import flexibility, and we said if we could be importing support, what would we do? Now, obviously, you can do, I don't know. I don't know if it's like announced. Is it announced today? Like, is Sorter actually coming to TSM?
Yeah.
I know that's been like the rumor.
Yeah,
but
that was announced this morning, so that's
yeah,
official.
so obviously
pending
you
right
can-
approval, they say.
Yeah, when you're importing, you can obviously swing for the fences, and I think given the circumstances of their roster, like maybe it'll make sense. But for us, I don't think we were in a position where we said like we're gonna go try to like do something crazy and bring some Korean support who doesn't necessarily have English proficiency into a roster with a bunch of young players. For us, we said we have space for experience if we want it, but we are ready to develop if there's someone we think makes sense. And I think we landed somewhere kind of in the middle where another minor region player who has a lot of history there, a lot of experience, but hasn't made the leap to a major region, I think fits almost perfectly into not only our narrative, obviously, with these young guys, and then ultimately having Stixxay, but the idea of how we want to be developing, what we want to do. I think we have a perfect set of coaches to be able to work with a player like Newbie.
Sure. And John, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what kind of a player Newbie is? Like, is he a very lane dominant support? Is he more of a roamer? Is he a playmaker? What kind of profile are we getting there?
Yeah, definitely someone who's kind of willing to make his mark on the game pretty consistently. For some kind of background, a lot of the kind of end of split rewards and accolades that they give out in the Latin American League is very similar to how we do it. So there's your all pro team, your MVP, all that kind of stuff. And for both splits this year within their league, they basically picked the entire roster of the All Knights And of that roster, they decided the MVP was Newbie. So definitely someone who is making an impact on these games, even though he is playing on basically the first place All-Pro team in the league. They're very clearly the most dominant team, and of them, he is the most, kind of key to their success.
Okay, great. So 2 more players, and we've been mentioning their names, both of them. Let's talk about Ablazeolive, because he's someone who has been kind of in that group of domestic mid laners, kind of trying to break through into LCS, seasoning himself in Academy, that kind of thing. And obviously you already had him inside your org. How much of this decision to bring him up as the LCS starter was, he's the mid that we have in our org, and we feel comfortable running with him, versus, we think he's the best mid in the Academy and want to promote him, that kind of thing. Like, how does that balance out?
Yeah, I'll actually do some exposing here on our thought process for Nick, for Olive. Funny enough, last year, everyone knows obviously that we did kind of a last second. I think Grace even spoke to this in his post, but we did a bit of a last second pivot towards Demonte, towards Tanner going into summer on like a pretty tight timeline, which was on Dignitas's end. I think they were navigating their had 3 mid laners and figuring things out. So for us, it was kind of like okay. But to be clear, before that happened, we actually had already been doing mid lane tryouts, and we're heavily considering, I think, in a lot of cases, leaning towards Olive getting his LCS start come summer. I think that was actually the intention. At a minimum, I think we would have seen him playing some games, not with a necessary guaranteed commitment that Grayson was out or anything, but I think there was going to be a lot more flexibility and expectation that we are still building, we're still doing what we're doing, but we need to explore and understand, and having a player his caliber just sitting on Academy doesn't do anyone justice. So I think going into summer, that was actually an intention we had until we kind of had that pivot towards Tanner. With that pressure no longer in position for us, I think the recognizing that we have room to develop, and we have players that are really motivated and driven to work together on that type of front, and with a lot of patience, we think it makes absolute sense. Like this is Nick's window. This is exactly everything he's been building towards, like his goals, his timing. He's never been the guy that's like, I have to have LCS right now. He's always been when the time makes sense with the players that make sense. I want to be able to make a mark, and I think we've checked all those boxes right now in a way that like the coaching staff is super excited about it, and obviously we know Nick is also pretty jazzed up.
Yeah, what kind of ceiling do you see from a player like Nick, like Ablazeolive? How good do you think he can be, given a year, given a couple of years in LCS?
Yeah, so what's funny is we actually had, for example, Palafox last year, before we had Olive. And from our internal, kind of like the meters that we rank everybody and try to figure things out and how we navigate, we ended up in a position where we had to discuss having something more immediate going into this year for mid lane for LCS. And so we actually gave up Palafox with the intention of bringing on someone with a little bit more experience to help stabilize and give Closer and FBI the security and confidence that they had. They didn't have any other rookies with them, no other guys that were jumping onto the LCS stage for the first time like they both were. And I think what's funny about that is we were actually only okay with that because we had high confidence we could go get Olive in return for Academy. I think we were like, okay, Palafox probably needs another year in Academy, and we need an LCS mid laner now, so let's go after Grayson, and by extension, we'll grab Ablazeolive, who effectively is our parallel, in our opinion, for what he does and how much time he needs, maybe about a year. And I think we actually accelerated over that. Like I said, we were intending on putting Ablazeolive in sooner, and in retrospect now, it's lined up perfectly where we've given him that year that we thought we were going to need, and now he actually gets to on-ramp the way he's supposed to.
Great. Okay, and then the final piece of your LCS roster. So we talked about Niles and Iconic, we talked about Newbie, Ablazeolive, and then you had kind of your veteran player coming in with Stixxay in the bottom lane. And like you guys said, there was a really big shuffle of bot laners. I think there are a few players that that were in the LCS that aren't going to be in the LCS next year. Stixxay is when you're bringing over from CLG, and obviously the entire CLG team had a rough year in 2020. What is it about Stixxay that you guys feel is the right fit to kind of be the veteran anchor on this roster and help these younger players kind of grow into their roles?
Yeah, so Trevor's interesting because I think not only us, but I think teams in general across the LCS for a long time have actually eyed Trevor. I think obviously CLG was kind of a roller coaster for the last couple of years. But obviously prior to the roller coaster, they'd found a lot of success very consistently, and he was like a super stable part of that at all times. I don't think there was very few windows where he specifically like individually was underperforming or struggling in a way that was like indicated that he was the weak point. I think they always just had like structural problems that they were facing that were like more and more clear to the league. And I think what's funny is like we've always like not just Golden Guardians, but I think a lot of teams have always had the conversation that domestic AD carry tends to be more successful in North America. I think this year again, AD carry was like the least imported role for North America at least going into Worlds. I think all three of our ADs were domestic. And I think that really signals that player he was obviously just as competitive with these guys. I think if you look at Stixxay, he's been around effectively as long as and had some of the same success that like Wild Turtle was having. Maybe not the same success, but obviously the same tenure as Double Lift. But obviously with a drastically different set of teammates.
Yeah.
So I think for us, we have to be able to. I think what we can do is we can effectively disassociate his history with only CLG, whereas some of these other guys like Turtle and Peter have had opportunities with other teams to show their excellence, even as recently as this last split. And we think that breath of fresh air. If there's a single veteran in the league that deserves like a breath of fresh air, and another opportunity, in our opinion, it's Trevor.
And John, can you give us a bit of an idea, like how much would you pick a player like him based on his in-game play versus his personality, his ability to be a mentor, his communication, things like that?
Yeah, so especially for the kind of roster we're putting together, like you need to have people bought in. You can't just have, your 4 young players who are like, yeah, like this is our time, we're going to get some experience, we're going to get better, like this is going to be our improvement year, and then just throw in some experienced player to say like, you're the glue guy, just don't int. Like that's obviously not going to work structurally, right? Like you need to have that person to say like, yes, I'm on a team full of young players. Like I know what that entails, I know what that means, and I know what, that then asks of me. I need to be, part of the system. I need to be someone who's kind of helping to guide things. And yes, I need to be the glue guy in the sense that I need to be a stable performer the whole time, and I need to be like a point of consistency on this team. But I also need to be doing what I can to grow my leadership skills in the same way that maybe they're developing some of their in-game and more team-related skills. And I think it really is kind of like a multi-layered thing where you really need buy-in on all sides. Like the coaches, players, especially the veterans, need to all be bought in. And I don't think many other ADs in the league would be kind of as amenable and as on board as Trevor would be for a team in a kind of a situation like this.
Is that something you specifically approached him with and said, hey, here's the kind of project we're working on, and we think you'd be a good fit as this kind of, this leadership role, this teaching role? Is that something that you led with when you talked to him?
Yeah, I can let Danan speak to that.
Yeah. So, I think like pretty clearly the timeline for which we were talking about Trevor was pretty clearly after we'd already traded FBI away. And in that circumstance, I think there were still a few pathways where we'd consider putting something together that had more than like 1 or 2 veterans. So it wasn't gonna like initially always gonna be that conversation. But I think by the time that CLG was positioned to no longer have him starting, which I think was pretty mid to late in this offseason, in my opinion, I think by then it was pretty clear what we were doing. I think that was understood. I think obviously we had to kind of disclose it because not everybody knew all of this information, especially not all of the players. But he was absolutely super amenable. He's one of the veterans that, like I said, that's one of the reasons we've always had an interest, because we knew we've been rebuilding for 2 years now. We've never been of the opinion, even with our veteran year 1 roster, it was kind of a rebuilding of assets, less so than it was like an actual rebuilding of the talent. And I think with respect to Trevor, the first initial conversation and even the subsequent conversations, he never wavered. I think there's a lot of veterans who say or articulate, I'm interested, I'm open to the idea, I want to build my leadership skills. Yeah, I want to like build more value outside of just how I play the game. I want to be more for the organization and for the team. But I think he was the only one that was like super consistent in his messaging. I think he's the guy that clearly understood the scope of what we were doing and the scope of what was happening with the league, and how that was like coming to a crossroads for his career too with CLG. And I think it was like super opportune and awesome that we were able to like get everything to smoothly transition, when I think historically that's been a blocker, right? I think teams have considered it. I think CLG's considered trading him away before. But I think not enough boxes had been checked, and not some people weren't motivated enough, and I think we were.
Can you give just a little bit of information before we move on here? Stixxay still under contract with CLG, and did you like take on that contract? Did you buy him out and sign a new one? What's the situation with him and his contract with you guys?
Yeah, for sure. So I usually don't go too deep unless like the player or the organization has like gone out of their way, requested it, pushed on something. I think it's always a three-party circumstance.
Yeah.
In this case, I can confirm. Yeah, we paid a buyout and we altered his contract. We have effectively amended, or in our case, I would say we overwrote. We'd like do a template system that's kind of different from some teams.
Okay, cool. So moving on to Academy then, because when you're looking at, a rebuilding situation, of course, you're also looking at who is going to be at your next layer of your team and who's going to be trying to, push these guys. And if that goes really well, maybe they even try to take those spots away. So the Academy roster you guys landed with, Tally, who was most recently playing mid at Worlds, but has role swapped back to his original top lane position. And then you have RoseThorn, Yunbee, Prismal, and Chime. Chime was in your organization before, but the rest of them are new to you guys. People might know Prismal from playing in Academy with the 100 Thieves. And then RoseThorn and Yunbee were both at Scouting Grounds and have been around a little bit in Amateur. So walk us through the construction of this roster. I guess you'd look at Tally as being kind of the veteran glue guy in this layer of it, but who are the real standouts in Academy? What has you really excited?
Yeah, so for me, I think there's a lot to be excited about. Obviously, this is a very different look to where we were last season. We obviously changed out a bunch of players. We had a lot of expiring contracts and a lot of kind of change-ups to be made. For me, this is kind of like starting from kind of a full, fresh slate for the most part. Obviously, in summer, we were very happy with Chime and his growth. Obviously, being remote for the split made it very tricky for him, and I think he was able to rise above that and really show that he has what it takes to get better and get to that LCS stage eventually. Just a matter of kind of the circumstances getting better so that he can kind of accelerate that growth. For as far as this roster, the standout that I would say is definitely Prismal. He's a player that I've wanted to work with for a long time, and I think obviously with his time on 100 Thieves, it seemed like that wasn't really going to come to an end anytime soon. They were going to be kind of sticking together for a while, and ultimately, for me, like being able to get this opportunity to work with him, and not only that, but put him with a support that I'm very confident in the ability to grow. I think they mesh really well on like a personal level. They're both very big collaborative players that want to work with whoever they're working with on the team and kind of build that synergy, grow, and get on the same page and all that stuff that you want to hear. Obviously, it's all very much like tangible and something that they're going to be doing. The other things I'm interested about is like some of our younger guys in Yunbee and RoseThorn. RoseThorn is someone that we saw a lot of in our internal trials that I think this is where we kind of make the joke about, try not to read too much into Scouting Grounds. RoseThorn was someone that we were very confident in from our kind of internal trial system that we did. He's someone who stood out very much, and he's someone that we feel like, especially with the staff we have, that we can kind of push that kind of performance that we saw to the next level and kind of get him at the top of Academy form at the very least within a split. And with Yunbee, he was obviously the most, in our opinion, the most standout mid at Scouting Grounds. Obviously, players like Copy had a lot of kind of backstory to them where they had played on 100 Next, and that was very like a visible thing for the average kind of person and average fan. But for us, Yunbee really came out of nowhere, and being able to contend with that, with the kind of personality and the attitude that he had, was something that we saw as like some kind of like a diamond in the rough, a lot of potential to be had there, and something that we were more than happy to kind of pick up on using one of our draft picks. And then obviously Tally, like you said, very much like a veteran presence. I know, having spoken with him and kind of seen the overall kind of way that the OPL shook out this last year, I don't think mid lane was something that he had anticipated playing, but I think he was more than happy to take the chance and play on a very strong and competitive roster to kind of get that chance to go to Worlds and get that experience. And now that he's had that experience, I think it's a really great time for him to come here, play top lane like he kind of always really wanted to, and do it in a system where we are going to be kind of helping build the other aspects of the game while he kind of refines his footing in the top lane. And hopefully we can hit the ground running and have some pretty competitive games to watch for the fans.
Yeah, now that Tally has been to Worlds, he'll be hopefully going to Academy Worlds, which even Academy Worlds is going to look a little different in 2021. We can talk a little bit about the format in a minute, but with these five guys, it's not the most important thing in Academy to kind of win an Academy championship stuff, but it does help, right? It does help with, you can look at what Cloud9 has achieved when they win these Academy titles, and then I think that definitely helps with increasing the value of those players, whether they're going to promote them or sell them or whatever that's going to be. Do you see this as a lineup that is going to be like competing for the very best in Academy, or is how much is that a goal even?
So for me, the goal that I would always set in the past with the old formats that we've had is I want to get my players to the best of fives. Like that's ultimately my goal is I want to get them tried and tested in what a playoff experience feels like, because that is the only time in the year in the Academy system where you're going to get that opportunity. Obviously with this new amateur circuit and stuff, there's potential for more of those opportunities to be more accessible for Academy players. So for me, obviously the bar, it lowers a little bit in the sense that the thing that I wanted as a goal for my players is something that's going to be much more achievable. But in the past, the reason why I really wanted that was you're not really going to get a high stress, kind of high competition environment outside of those playoff games. And that is something I always wanted to get my players some amount of experience in. So going into this next year, obviously, I don't expect my team to always just be first, second all the time. Like I just want to make sure that my guys are getting better. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, that is what matters the most to me, especially within my role. I want my players getting better at a rate that is kind of commensurate with where they're at in their career or better. So for Ablazeolive, we knew he was going to be a top tier Academy mid, and we wanted to get him the last little bits he needed to be able to take that LCS starting spot somewhere. And obviously, we were happy that it could be with us. But for other players who are much younger, like I want to make sure that within the first splitter, so we're able to lay down like some really consistent fundamentals and get that player at the kind of mid to high tier of Academy, so that they are someone who can kind of work with their peers and be kind of valued within the space. And then once the time comes for them to make that leap, we can look to kind of get more exposure through winning, coming closer to winning, getting top two, stuff like that, like we had done in the not this 2020 season, but in 2019 summer. That's something that we very much had kind of like in our future. Obviously fell a little short to 100 Thieves there, but that visibility is ultimately what really lets players make the jump in a lot of cases, and that's something that C9's really benefited from. But I will say, like, for the people that are truly paying attention to these Academy leagues, we all kind of see who the standout performers are. It just kind of gives that extra little nudge of visibility to get the public to say, like, hey, you should get that one person. Like I saw them winning Academy and that was pretty sweet. And that really kind of helps in a lot of players' cases to kind of, spark that flame and really get things going.
Yeah, for sure. And for people who want to get deeper thoughts on the changes to the Academy and amateur format for 2021, actually, John, you called into my stream a couple weeks ago, and we talked a lot about that format and what the implications are. So you can find that on the YouTube channel. I'll make sure a link to that is in the show notes. But I think one of the really big benefits of that format change is, like you're saying, a lot more tournament structure to it, which means a lot more best of 5 opportunities, a lot more chances to play these kind of high stress games, relatively speaking. Being able to play in series play, which is so important, and that kind of thing. Did that format change? And assuming that you guys had a little more lead time on knowing that something like that was coming down the pipe, did that format change affect the way you would build an Academy team, or is that something that you probably would have gone with these players anyways?
So given the circumstances, I think I definitely probably would have made these changes. I think the one thing I will say, kind of retroing a little bit on the stuff we've said before about kind of the trials we've been running, obviously a lot of the plans there was to have those tryouts be for a third team as well in the amateur circuit. That's something that we really wanted to be participating in. Obviously, I kind of spoke to my kind of displeasure with how things ended up on the rules side to say, like, we weren't ultimately able to compete in that for a host of different reasons. But obviously with that, we could then say those players that we had our eyes on for amateur, we're going to kind of continue to keep our eyes on them throughout the 2021 season, and this, especially with this new format. And for us in Academy, we're going to be picking up players that are kind of from that pool of upper amateur players and say, like, you know what, we've got a spot for you here. Come take your chance. We'll try and put in as much effort as we can. You do the same, and let's see where we can take your career at that point.
Yeah, for sure. So in the interest of time, we'll move forward a little bit, because I'd love to talk a bit about your organization's plan for kind of coaching and player development and the staff you've brought in on that front. Because if you are going to be kind of trying to develop players longer, you need a bit of a different profile to your coaching staff compared to a team that is out trying to win LCS right now, right? You've probably got a little bit of a different goal there. So tell me about your 2021 coaching staff. I think it's mostly the same as what you had, but you made a couple of changes there. Danan, if you want to maybe walk us through any changes you've made to the coaches you brought in and what makes you confident that they're the right fit for what you guys are trying to achieve.
Okay. I'll only speak briefly on the LCS. One, for 2 reasons. One, we just announced a departure. We haven't announced a replacement. We have someone like making a transition. We have a coach that we're like expanding our LCS staff with. There's a couple different things happening, but none of it's like announced or confirmed, so I can't dive too deep into it.
Sure.
But what I can say confidently is that our core is back. We have an Arrow, we have Choo Choos, we have Spooks. I would say that's obviously what our foundation going into the offseason was expected to be in almost all circumstances, no matter what. It was our intention to retain them. We've actually signed extensions with all three to the maximum of 3 years. And we're pretty happy. We're really poised, I think, to be super confident and super thrilled about being able to keep working with those guys and keep seeing them develop. I think what's been so insanely awesome is that they didn't have a ton of experience. They didn't have a ton of history. Obviously, an Arrow had a little bit bouncing around kind of the globe. But in the grand scheme of our coaching staff, we were surprisingly youthful and very high caliber. Like a lot of former players, a lot of people who are still respected to this day, even by their peers, by the players in their space for their play. They're still super competitive. What's actually a really interesting point to make is that I think now, funny enough, Inero might be the longest standing head coach in the league. You might have to correct me on it, but I think effectively every single organization, every single LCS organization had a head coach change in the last 12 months. Except effectively us.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone else.
Yeah, I think obviously Nick for his first year with Golden Guardians stepped into Academy for a while, but I think ever since he's come back up, it's been pretty fantastic, and I think that speaks to the stability and confidence we have in our coaching staff relative to I think a lot of other teams who, in my opinion, something that's gone unnoticed has been the great coaching shift, some form of exodus, effectively, where teams all ran out of patience for their head coaches, kind of all at the same time this offseason, except for us. And I think that speaks volumes to how much we value Nick and how much confidence we have in his ability to do his job. And because of that, I think that's why you're going to be seeing the expansion stuff that we're going to announce soon. I'll kick this over to John. I think he's in a similar position where I don't know if we've entirely announced the structural changes for coaching overall that like also are enacted a little bit in Academy, but we've at least revealed his head coach.
Yeah, so I can speak to a little bit to kind of the changes we're making in Academy. Obviously, more announcements to come on staff, but what I will say is Kubz is someone that we've obviously known for a long time. Both me and Danan do have past experience with him on other teams, and I think that's something that people were very quick to notice. But what's something I do want to point out is obviously we've had a lot of opportunity to work with him in the past, and we've kind of elected not to on multiple occasions. And at this point, with the kind of experience that he's put together and the kind of teams that he's been working with in the past, I know a lot of people say, working in Academy is not all that great, but I think given his tenure with Optic and then IMT, we definitely saw a lot of players moving up from his system into LCS and people hyping up those players. And I think ultimately there is a lot of credit to be made giving him credit for those kind of transitions that his players did make. Obviously, for me, in my perspective, with the players that we have, I want someone who is very confident in leading a system and being able to kind of not necessarily be like an authoritarian coach, but someone who's very confident in working through a system that they have and kind of putting all those players through, and ideally working with the rest of the staff to build kind of a more unified idea of like what are we teaching players, how are we teaching players, and getting everyone at that's all levels to kind of align in that way. And someone, for Kubz, that's something that we feel like he can very much do and bring to the table up above other candidates in the position. I know a lot of people are very quick to dismiss him given some of the past that he's had on other teams and, his career being what it is. But I think with all the things he's learned and all the things that he's going to continue to learn, that, Golden Guardians is a place that Kubz can really kind of flourish and grow and develop a lot of the skills he's already kind of shown on other teams in his time there.
Yeah, and for those who aren't so familiar with Kubz, who is going to be head coaching your Academy team, like he's been around in the scene for a long time, 6-7 years at least at this point, right? And he's coached in Academy, as you mentioned, with Optic and Immortals. He's also coached in Europe, right? And he's promoted teams from into the LCS. He's promoted a team into the LEC. He coached with Giants in the LEC, right? How much of his past, rather, coaching at both the Academy level or kind of the European equivalent of Academy level versus, also coaching at the LEC level. I believe it was. And Giants were in the LEC when he was with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. So his experience coaching at both of those levels, is that something that played into kind of your decision to bring him in? Is it purely about his ability to teach younger players? What is it about his kind of coaching style or experience that led you to that choice?
Yeah, for me, it's something that is kind of like a mixture of the two, but more definitely leaning towards the development side. Obviously, being able to take players that, maybe are a little undervalued in the system and having success with those players in spite of it, especially to the point of promotion back in that old promotion relegation system, is something that's very commendable on a coach. Obviously, a lot of the players speak very highly of him after the fact of those promotions and those times that he spent with them. And for me, that's something that I put a lot of value in, and especially in his time in Optic and IMT. Like, obviously, a lot of people were very excited to see players like Insanity come up through his system, but obviously, the players have to be putting in the effort in the same way that the coaches need to. And on the other side, I definitely want to see more kind of credit being given to these academy coaches at all levels, not just within our team, but at all these different teams. I know there's been a ton of credit given to, like, for example, Kelsey Moser, who's had a great time building up multiple systems of development within 100 Thieves, and I'd like to see that kind of credit being extended to other teams and without throughout the league that maybe don't necessarily have that kind of public flair that the 100 Thieves Next system kind of had this year. And ultimately, I think that's something that I want to see for Kubz as well.
Yeah, I think it's hard enough to find really good coaches at the LCS level, and I'd say it's that much harder to find good coaches who can be in the academy level and be developing these players and teaching, where arguably it's even more important to have really strong coaches at academy if you want to develop these players up, right? Whereas at the LCS level, I think you need a little more facilitation, you need a little more kind of, helping to unify the way your team communicates, but the players themselves should probably, in a relative sense, be leading a little more of how they play compared to the academy players. So, hoping for your sake that Kubz works out really well in that role, and that these players you're going to be developing will really pan out for you guys. So to kind of wrap up all this conversation, we've talked about kind of what a rebuild means to you guys. We talked about the players you brought in and some of the staff that you got working with them. Over the next 12 months, Danan, what would success look like for you guys? What would you look at the end of these 12 months and say, yeah, all of this worked kind of the way we were hoping it would? But does that look like a certain number of players retained and competing at a certain level? Does it look like, what does that mean for your competitive accomplishments? How would you define that success?
So I'll speak on that on two angles. I'll say what I think the public expects. The public always expects too much, and they're absolutely ridiculous in their standards, and they think everybody must always be winning, and anyone who's not winning is losing, and therefore, if you're not first, you're last. In the true words of Ricky Bobby, for some reason, that's kind of the standard I think we've set. Hopefully, we'll be able to break that mold and say, hey, like, pretty clearly, this is not a roster where we're swinging for the fences and going for a championship. And with that being said, the way we're actually measuring our success is probably just going to be where we end up slotting our players at the end of the year. I think 12 months from now, it would be good. It'd be pleasant if we could get 2 or 3 of those guys to be recognized and regarded as like top 6 in their role. Effectively, like, there's like that kind of like guaranteed playoff cutoff point. I think there's always like 1 or 2 teams in the league that like build the roster that's clearly not trying to win the LCS, but is clearly just trying to qualify for playoffs. I don't think our roster needs to be competitive with that. I think our individual players need to grow, and we need to example those guys are holding up to that standard within 12 months of play. I think if they can walk into the league and say, I've never played a single LCS game, our entire top side, mid jungle top, never played a single LCS game in any real form. If they can walk in 12 months from now, the majority of people who assess their talent, whether that's the pundits, whether that's the fans, whether that's us ourselves internally, if the majority of people are landing on, okay, yeah, those guys are probably playoff capable, playoff ready, they are top 6, I think that's a win. I think that's how you start the platform. Now, we might be able to hit a couple home runs like we did with Closer and FBI, which I think we actually had the same standard, but people were holding them in higher regard because like one had been to MSI, the other had been to Worlds. Even though it was through minor regions. I think we obviously hit a couple home runs, and they, instead of being regarded as top 6, got pretty clearly regarded as top 4, top 3, maybe even top 2 in some circumstances. So obviously, if that happens, cool, that's like a bonus on top of the system we've built. But ultimately, I think if we can get those guys recognized as top 6 players in their role, that's the start. That's effectively the first brick that's going to be building the wall that we're climbing on.
Great. Well, yeah, best of luck to you guys as you try to reach those goals. I think we're all going to be watching to see which of the players, show that form, which of them kind of develop into that capability. Whether we see any of the players from the academy level coming up and getting a few games, trying out. I think we still don't know the actual competitive format for LCS in 2021, but there have been some kind of rumors it's going to be a full year season rather than 2 splits, and maybe that gives a little more opportunity to kind of interchange some of the players LCS and academy and give everybody some play time. Whatever it's going to be, I think we're all very excited to see how the Golden Guardians project works out. Whether that inspires any other teams in the LCS to take a little bit more of a hardcore rebuild approach. I think we've seen some partial moves in that direction from a couple of the teams, but you guys seem to be the first ones who are really kind of buying into that concept quite this hard. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see how it plays out. Anything you guys would like to leave the listeners with? Social media shout-outs, anything else? Black Friday sales. What should we be making sure everybody's paying attention to?
I'll let John go first.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, obviously, same old, same old. Pay attention to all the players, follow us on socials, all that kind of basic stuff. But more importantly, watch Academy, watch Amateur, understand where these players are coming from and all the work that they're putting in to get to that LCS stage, so that you could be a more informed fan, but also like you can kind of see that story. I think it's a much more compelling experience when you kind of watch all the different leagues at the same time, or at least are somewhat aware, to be able to see kind of the transition as players move up through this system, especially now that it's more robust. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of a cool thing to talk about with your friends, and it's just ultimately more League of Legends that you can watch, and hopefully it makes the LCS kind of better for it in the long term.
Cool.
Danan?
So I'm just gonna shout out just a really small list of things. First, obviously, check out my Twitter, Danan. I almost never tweet, but like I feel obligated to pretend I have social media presence. I'm gonna shout out. This offseason has been crazy. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it's like a significant shift for not just us, but the entire league. And that's not super simple or straightforward as much as it might look like in the reporting. And that's been a lot of stress for everybody involved. So obviously, thanks to John and our staff, Nick, Sam, Aaron, across the board, the players that we retained, the players that we didn't retain, thanks for your patience through this offseason. I know it was a bit of a roller coaster. And especially thanks to my wife for helping me survive this offseason. It's been crazy, especially COVID-ridden. And the last thing I want to note, not necessarily a shout out, probably one of the coolest parts of my career, and I wish it had been in person. Unfortunately, it couldn't be due to COVID and due to the offseason. But the day we actually formalized to Ablazeolive that he was going to be starting LCS, probably like this is one of the coolest things that can happen. Like the timing and everything is so rare. It was actually his birthday. So we actually dragged him into a room in Discord and had like everybody there. And like obviously the implication seems to be like, we're just saying happy birthday. We're just trying to have some camaraderie and have fun. And instead, we were actually breaking the news to him that he was going to be guaranteedly starting. This was happening. This was his opportunity, his on-ramp, which is super cool. You could tell how excited he was. He was popping off all over the place. It's really hard to characterize that when he's thousands of miles away. I think he's back home in Canada right now, and a lot of us are like in LA. But that's probably one of my career highlights for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. That's awesome to hear. So best of luck to him. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and other platforms, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot more topics. Links for all of those will be in the show notes. This has been the TrueSight podcast with Danan and John, the general manager and assistant general manager of the Golden Guardians, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thank you for listening.